Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program created in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Nadim Shohdy, an entrepreneur in residence at RA Capital.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and we are really glad that you're here with us for another edition of our virtual breakfast series. A special thanks to Eisner Amper, our sponsor for this month's series of breakfast. We've been talking, we're continuing yesterday, as many of you know, we hosted our emerging biotech company showcase in partnership with the New York Stock Exchange. And so we're down on the trading floor and at the exchange all day, hearing companies. And today we're going to continue to talk about finance and investment with our guest, Nadim Shohdy. So, and always, I almost forget this now. I've said it so often, it becomes, I almost forget. Please ask your questions as we go through the discussion with Nadim. Put them either in the Q&A or the chat, and Derek and I will get to them throughout the course of our conversation with him. With that, welcome, and I will turn it over to Derek to do a more full introduction of our esteemed guest.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And Nadim, thank you so much for being with us. This is another one of those that I just get super excited about. You're an absolutely great kind of New York origin story. You cover just about every single base we can think about covering in great things about New York. So we're super excited to have you here.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm beyond ecstatic to be with you guys today.
Okay, so in general, we tend to kick things off with a bit of an origin story, and you've got a fantastic one. So why don't you kind of take a couple minutes and tell us how you got where you are today?
Sure. So let me see. So I'm basically an adopted New Yorker, and my entire adult life has been in some environs of New York. So I did my undergraduate at Stony Brook, and then after my bachelor's degree, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I got my first job at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory and worked there for a few years. And that's really where I got the research bug, and I really fell in love with science much more than anything I had done in my undergraduate days. So I went to graduate school at Columbia, did my PhD in microbiology under Howard Schuman. And then after I defended, I then did my postdoc at Rockefeller in Charlie Rice's lab, working on hepatitis C, virus cell biology, host pathogen interactions. And that was a wonderful place, not just because, great impact science. Charlie was a wonderful, wonderful mentor, but also Charlie's lab covered the entire gamut of hepatitis C and had a lot of interactions and collaborations with industry, both small biotech as well as big pharma, especially around HCV. And that's where I got a little bit more exposed to biotech, translational science. Further, when I was at Rockefeller, I started sort of pursuing my curiosity further. I helped start sort of a biotech forum, biotech club at Rockefeller with a couple of other colleagues there to also have invited speakers in biotech and so on. So when at the end of my postdoc, I knew I loved science, but I was very attracted to the translational bug. And that's where I decided I'm going to have that soul searching moment that a lot of scientists have, where I wanted to sort of hang up the pipetteman, but still be involved in some other aspect of science that didn't involve me pipetting. And I was very attracted to biotech. So that was in the fall of 2008. Not exactly the best time to try to making a career switch. And I was all ready to go, and then the world imploded. So it took me a lot of places I had been talking to, especially boutique biotech consulting firms, basically either went under or froze hiring, and things got a little bit messier. But then I managed to get my first job from my postdoc at IAVI, the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. And I worked there for a couple of years, and that was an incredibly illuminating experience that informed a lot of my thinking, a lot of my MO for years and years to come, even to this day. So really in brief, so IAVI, its headquarters are in New York, but they really are a global organization. They have R&D facilities in Brooklyn, in London. They run clinical trials in the developing world. They sponsor research in academics. And then when I had joined, they had also just gotten a pot of money from Bill and Melinda Gates to fund collaborations with small biotech companies, as well as some academics, but mostly small biotech companies. And those collaborations were meant to explore whether that biotech technology that is probably not being developed for HIV vaccines could be the basis of a collaboration with the IAVI scientists to see whether it could solve one of the many scientific bottlenecks precluding us from having a successful prophylactic HIV vaccine. So my job, straight out of my postdoc, was to be technology scout / business development analyst / competitive intelligence guy / due diligence / helping the scientists evaluate the technologies / get the coffee for everybody during our weekly team meetings. And it was great in a number of reasons. The first is I got exposed to so many different areas of science, including, I should also add, back in the day, I was exposed to messenger RNA vaccines way back then, looking at that technology, as well as a slew of other ones. It also, because of the complexity of the problem where we were trying to solve and have yet to solve, it really forced us to really dig deep into lots of different areas of collaboration and areas of science, and also be very creative about how we could envision ways of collaborating to see whether it could work or be applied to HIV vaccines. It also made me work very, very closely with the scientists. And this is going to be a theme throughout my entire career. It wasn't simply working on the transactional and the business side. There was definitely that, but it also was a continuously two-way street with the scientists at IAVI and the business considerations, and of course the scientists and the BD people on the myriad of startups and academic groups on the external world we tried to collaborate with. So that was wonderful. So I did that for 2 years. It was a wonderful experience. But you know, then at some point you could sort of hit a limit to what can be done in the HIV vaccine space. So so after that, I jumped ship and I joined NYU School of Medicine at their tech transfer office, and really starting at the very bottom of the ladder, doing classical tech transfer, invention disclosures, licensing, marketing, trying to do deal making, working closely with the faculty. And that was great because I got to learn, you know, classical tech transfer. I got to learn the anatomy of a license agreement, the ins and outs of patenting, the ins and outs of patent prosecution. And these are essential elements whenever that serves me well for the rest of my career. And I also got a chance to learn really from some of the best people, frankly, in this field. So Abram Goldfinger and Sadma Chitali really mentored me on sort of all these tech transfer activities I just described. But there was also that sense of frustration that no matter, you know, how great the academic PIs were and the work they were doing, no matter how great sort of our skill sets were in patenting and marketing and so on, the projects were always very early, that it became very, very difficult to find meaningful suitors on with respect to licensing, whether they're pharmaceutical companies or investors, venture capital or angels, for new co-formation. And plus, also, this was the post-2008 funk, so that
I
also
was just thinking that.
yeah.
So I actually channeled my frustration into thinking, how could we do it better? And I taught myself in sort of on the side everything to do with de-risking early stage drug discovery, and that was really my forte, less so on medical devices and diagnostics. So to make a long story short, I read up everything I can. I spoke to everybody I can in the industry, in academia, in government, in venture, in pharma. A lot of these contacts were actually initiated because of collisions I had with them during Derek's events that he would plan on a regular basis that I attended over the years. And I started seeing some common themes around de-risking super early academic assets or academic platforms, and what is sort of the shortest distance potentially to get it off our hands and into the hands of for-profit entities who could then put more resources and expertise to take it hopefully down the risky drug development path. And and then somehow, some way, I ended up writing a business plan that somehow, some way, landed on the desk of Daphna Barsagi, the chief scientific officer of NYU School of Medicine. Actually, it was Abram Goldfinger, the head of NYU's Tech Transfer Office, who basically was talking to me about new ideas. I told him this thing that I was working on, this blueprint, and he basically told Daphna, I got this young scrappy guy in my office who came up with this idea. And before I knew what was happening, through a lot of interactions with leadership and faculty, a new department was born called Therapeutic Alliances, or the Office of Therapeutic Alliances. And that became really the focus of my 7 out of 10 years I was at NYU, was helping build and run OTA as a new model, especially back then. Now I think there's a lot more initiatives at various academic institutions that have a lot of the hallmarks of OTA. Back then, it was much more of an oddball situation for an institution to do what we did. And I'll take a pause there.
I was gonna ask you if you were first. I don't remember at the time. I don't remember if anybody else has done it first. I think there's a lot of places now that mimicked it, but you're right. At the time, I don't remember anyone that had that particular function. So just to go kind of a little bit deeper, and it's funny. I remember when you were doing this. I actually remember you telling me some of the rationale, and the quote I can adapt here is, you said, our best assets are going to get licensed one way or another. Like there's going to be obvious interest. Those aren't the hard ones. It's the ones that are kind of in the middle where everyone has to do the same work to kind of move them to a place where they believe in them. And it doesn't matter if an outside group does this or if we do this, but somehow they have to kind of move up the ladder so that we can answer the basic questions here. And I think every academic institution had this challenge, right? For whatever is in the middle of your bell curve in terms of your assets, there's going to be basic stuff that people want to do with them, whether it's verifying the initial academic work, whether it's just basic stuff they're going to form out to a CRO anyway. It's not terribly innovative work, so to speak. There's not something that they have to do that's different. Anybody has to do just the same things.
So yeah, there's a lot there. So one, yes, you're right. When we launched OTA, there were very, very few models that were doing this. I think probably the closest one was probably Scripps through their Caliber program. Matt Tremblay over there is a kindred spirit. We're definitely on the same wavelength. So back then, definitely Scripps was, but Scripps is also very unique because that whole institution is very, very translationally focused. So, and maybe the Blavatnik Accelerator at the time at Harvard, but again, it was very few organizations who were doing it. But I would also add that what we did was a little bit more than simply having, master service agreements and with CROs and contracts with consultants that we can bring them to bear and have a slush fund to pay for stuff. It was a little bit more than that, because what we ended up doing at OTA, and this was wild. Can you imagine if the people in the tech transfer office are designing experiments with the faculty? And that's what we were doing. Yeah. And and that was wild for us to even propose this idea. And to be fair, we didn't propose it outright in the beginning. It kind of organically became just part of the MO.
You had to socialize that a little.
Yeah. But really how we did that was really, it ended up basic. And the second element of OT that was also important was we completely blurred the lines between the business development activities on the projects we were taking on with the scientific de-risking activities. Yeah. And I always repeat this, it's not that we melded those two things because we had a lot of free time in our hands and we could afford to do both. Rather, our founding principle was, you can't maximize the success of partnering super early stage technologies unless you're intimately involved in the activities that make it less early and more de-risked in the eyes of the potential buyer. And you can't plan and run these de-risking experiments without having a conduit directly to the potential buyers to know what kind of data they want to see to convince them to sign on the dotted line and take on the risk of putting in millions of dollars and time and effort by other people to build the story. So you need to have both sides talking to another. And of course, when that business plan was approved, it was awesome for about 5 minutes. And then there was the, oh no, how we're going to do this. And that's where really building the team of Therapeutics Alliances was really, that was a big catalyst. I think a big catalyst in my career has always been me being around and working with just fantastic people on either the science side or the business side and everything in between. So we started building the team internally, as well as a network of great consultants. And then that became sort of the SWAT team that worked closely with the faculty to help evaluate the asset and what needs to be done. And then, of course, execute whatever de-risking experiments needed to be done, mainly through CROs. But at the same time, we also never trusted our own ability to know what needs to be done to maximize the probability of a deal getting done. And I think that always had to do with sort of my the little bit of the insecurity in me has always been a constant fuel in my career. So what we always did, we always used to pressure test our ideas with the market, with the investors, with the drug companies, as well as also drug patient foundations, drug discovery foundations, disease foundations. Even when we knew the project was not yet unpartnerable, before we even did a penny's worth of work on it, we would actually shop the projects around and we look at the feedback in addition to our own diligence. Was the feedback like, this is great stuff, if only you had X, Y, Z, right. And if everybody's saying X, Y, Z is what needs to be done, then those are our marching orders, versus no matter what you guys do on this project, it's not going to fly because, and then that dialed it down on the sort of on the hotness scale. So anyway, so we did that, and we ended up over the course of many years working on dozens of projects, all shapes and sizes, all types of disease areas, all types of targets, all equally challenging, or well, that's not true, all challenging, some more than others. And of those, about 10 or 11 were eventually successfully partnered. Half of them straight to pharma, the other half to investors, whether they're venture capital firms or angels, and spun out into startups. I think there's at least maybe 8 or 9 that are still in, or 10 maybe that are still alive at NYU. And the others sort of are resting in peace. They didn't meet their milestones, and that's the name of the game. So in that regard, it was incredibly educational in so many different ways. And really, the projects that didn't work were just as informative and just as educational as the ones that did work. And I'm not just talking about the scientific aspects, but also the business aspects, the key aspects, the relationship management. But the other thing that was an additional sort of icing on the cake was, in the course of our desire to make projects more attractive to industry and investors, we also ended up making our projects equally interesting and attractive to nonprofit organizations, which ended up collaborating with us on many of our projects, which not only validated our projects more, because these disease foundations and government funding organizations, they also have a level of sophistication with respect to their diligence on projects they want to collaborate on, but it also increased our pool of resources. So our pool of resources became magnified so much because we had nonprofit resources plus what NYU Langone was giving us every year from its hospital budget, which I also add was an incredibly progressive thing to do by NYU.
Big time.
So we almost had like a very healthy seed stage fund to invest in pre-seed activities. So that was NYU, and I was there, like I said, for 10 years, and it was wonderful. I moved up the food chain, and when I left, I was an associate dean for Therapeutics Alliances, and I had started 10 years earlier at the very bottom of the ladder as an entry-level analyst in the tech transfer office. So it was a wonderful run.
So Nadim,
we had a quick question.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I'll ask that question. I want to ask another question first. So you were basically shifting the paradigm, right, of how labs interacted, how the academics interacted with potential investors or purchasers. How did the PIs and the investigators and the labs take that new suggestions or directions around how they needed to do their business?
Yep.
Initially with suspicion.
Do go on.
Yes, it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, initially with suspicion, I mean, initially, yeah, we didn't have much street cred because we were still starting out. It definitely helped that NYU had given us this pot of money to invest in projects. So that kind of, you know, the PIs were definitely keenly aware that, you know, but definitely with suspicion whenever we used to get into the science. But at the end of the day, we were very, very thorough and transparent with how we were thinking. The other thing is we built, we had a great team of people weighing in. So we had a network of fantastic consultants with 20, 30 years of pharma experience. Many of them have approved drugs to their name, whether they're chemists, biochemists, assay developers, and so on, ex-Merck, ex-Pharma, ex-BMS, ex-Novartis. So, you know, it's hard for a PI to, I mean, it's easy for a PI to argue with me, but it's hard for a PI to argue with somebody who has a drug to their name, right? Weighing in on, well, what's the best chemistry angle around this target, and so on and so forth. So that, and we always brought in our consultants in some way or another, including on projects where we were passing on working on.
Right.
And we were very thorough. We actually we were very thorough with our diligence rationale on why we should not invest in projects, as well as, of course, projects where we should invest in projects. So that was very, so we never said, like, we would never say things like, oh, this is too early, and then walk away, or industry is not going to fly with this. We would even show business development feedback. Remember, because we did both.
Yes.
So that helped reduce the suspicion. And of course, our own internal team. We hired people from pharma, and talking about full-time employees of OTA. So for example, Xinyan Wang at OTA, she came from 10 years in big pharma doing drug discovery operations. Then she basically was in charge of our research operations. When you have somebody like that, that gives us street cred with PIs who, especially when we're talking about translating their academic work to more product development. And then over the year, as the months went by, you know, people started, you know, seeing how we operate. And then we had a couple of small successes and a couple of more successes. And then word of mouth started to spread internally amongst the PIs. And we actually reached a point where PIs would come to us for feedback on their projects, that we told them we're not going to work on. And they're like, that's okay. We still want your feedback and your suggestions and your directions. Take a look at this, and so on. So, you know, it took time, but I think eventually, I would say when I left, 90% of the feedback was very positive. Never 100%, but definitely I would argue 90%.
And then we had a question from the audience that said, is the OTA program still alive and running at NYU?
It is. There's definitely been some a little bit of sort of revamping and retooling since I left, but no, Therapeutics Alliances is still there. Sadna Shitali at NYU oversees it. So yeah, I should also add the Therapeutic Alliances program is for NYU only. So that's so just, because we've gotten asked that question before.
Okay, there was one other thing that's just related to that and said, what kind of return did the aggressive approach did it achieve, right? So if you go by the numbers, I imagine your numbers back things up just from what you said before in terms of how many things you had in the pipeline, right? It's kind of hard because you don't really know what would have been done if you didn't do those things, but do you have a general estimate of what the return was for what you put in?
Sure. So about the return, so so we definitely had a lot of great sort of pure licensing revenue with the deals we've done on the project that exited. But the majority of those returns are not realized simply because these are super early stage deals where the terms are very back-ended. So, you know, milestones, royalties, you know, so it's taking time for the bio bucks to start filtering in. I am particularly proud that last year, one of our deals is now in the clinic. And when we did those deals,
which one?
It was, I'm not going to disclose that. Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
So, and then there's other ones moving behind it and so on. So the license revenue returns were good, but they were not spectacular. Again, because a lot of those deals are super, super early. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
However, and also you have to remember from an institute, the potential revenue streams, the future revenue streams are nice, but they're biobucks, okay?
Right.
So we were able to show the institution our value, not just by promising millions and hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of 10 or 15 years, if something makes it to an FDA approved drug and royalties and so on. But we also showed our near-term value by leveraging what I described, by using the data we were generating to convince VCs and pharma to also convince granting organizations to give us real grant money with full indirect expenses. So in a nutshell, we spent, in the course of NYU, we spent about $8 million on projects and operations. We brought in about 5 times that in non-dilutive money back to NYU, specifically,
which is awesome.
And that's separate from the license revenue we brought, which was definitely not as high as that, because again, a lot of it is pegged to the downstream success-based milestones. And we energized the institution, and also, so this is where it was a unique model, because it created value, potential value, and de-risking for the for-profit entities. But at the same time, it served both the long-term and the near-term success-based metric for an institution, for organizations whose primary mission is not commercialization, but patient care, education, and research dollars. So we really work to straddle both those worlds.
I would also argue that culturally it's a huge win, right? Because you basically, in many places there's friction between tech transfer offices, commercialization offices, and the PIs. And it sounds like a lot of what you did was you kind of broke down a lot of those barriers. And again, it's never 100%, but in a large majority of cases, you have kind of now this better understanding from your faculty around what it takes to get a license done, around what it takes to get a project done. And it's hard to put a dollar figure on that, but from a cultural perspective, that's worth a lot. It's actually a really big win.
Absolutely. I cannot begin to tell you how many instances we had where just the dynamics between the PI and us and the tech transfer office were one seamless sort of continuum, because the people working on the deal making were also intimately working closely with the people generating the data, with the PI, and everything was working. It was almost, the model isn't novel when you think about it. That's the model in any biotech company, any startup. That's the model. The scientists, the business aspects are all working seamlessly together. That we just borrowed that model that works so successfully in the startup scene and brought it in-house in an academic environment.
Yeah. So at some point you think about going to your next thing. So tell us how you got to RA Capital, and let's get a little bit into kind of this side of the equation. Now you kind of switch sides, right? You're now sort of obscurely on the buy side, even though you're still in a creation mode. So how did you get to RA Capital, and what are the things you're focusing on now?
Sure. So in the middle of the pandemic, or the first year of the pandemic, this was all done via Zoom and virtual interactions. People at RA were beginning to expand their company creation into more in the early stage, and they recognized they need to have more productive interactions with academic institutions as a source of innovation for early stage startups or incubation, company creation. So we had some mutual contacts there, and we started talking, and they were very sort of intrigued by my background, again straddling both worlds, and basically being able to work closely with very, very early academic research and draw out potential value through operational activities, drug discovery operations, business development, really helping build projects that are aligned with investors, what they want to see. So we started talking, and I was very, very intrigued by RA as an organization, but also their recent their increased activities in recent years around the early stage, especially around company creation. So 1 year ago, I jumped ship with a sad but excited heart. I left NYU, and I joined RA Capital, and it's been a wonderful experience because not just because I get to do what I'm experienced in the early stage company creation, project incubation, but also the collective experience, the institutional experiences of RA Capital, as well as their other activities that are not in the early stage, investing on the private side and the public side. That's just, I'm back at school basically, and I love it. It's a wonderful, wonderful group of people where you get exposed to the whole myriad of experiences and deal making and so on. That it's a great substrate, even for these super early stage activities that I'm involved in.
Right. So EIR is a bit of a vague term, right? I think it means different things in different places, and as a quote unquote entrepreneur in residence, in some funds, it means that you step in as an EIR and basically you have 12 months to go find a deal that you're going to go be the CEO as. But it sounds like that's not the kind of deal structure that you're working under. It sounds like you get to be a little bit more of a generalist. So what are the things that you're kind of tasked with doing as an EIR?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. The role of an EIR and even a venture partner really varies from venture capital firm to venture capital firm. Yeah. So at RA, it varies even within the organization, right, depending on the EIRs and the venture partners' sort of preferences, strengths, attributes, their motivations, and so on. So we've had EIRs and venture partners who fulfill the model you just described. They're there for a year and a half tops, and then they join full-time an RA-backed company. But that's not the only route. You could also have the more generalist being involved in lots of different things, advance them to a certain point, and then hand them off to somebody else who becomes the full-time, full-time leadership in that RA-backed entity, and off they go. And you stay in RA working on the next best thing. So my role is more of the latter, at least at this point in time. So especially because I'm in the early stage where projects are much more raw, much more, need a lot more work and higher risk. So my role at RA, I basically wear three hats. So one of my biggest hats is working with our company creation incubator. It's also called Raven. So Raven basically takes early stage ideas, mainly in therapeutics. That's the majority of our focus, even though we dabble a little bit in non-therapeutics, life sciences, devices, diagnostics, but the lion's share is in therapeutics. So we take early ideas, internal or external. I should also add that. So yeah, so we love ideas coming from, top investigators that could be potentially the basis for really transformative therapies, even if early. But we also like ideas that are homegrown. So we're not dogmatic in any sense of we believe in our own abilities. And we also love the innovation coming from external entities and academics. So, but a lot of those ideas are sometimes too early to put a very healthy Series A and pull together the whole management team and financing and syndicate and so on. So this is why the incubator was created, and it was created several years ago before I joined. It was really Andrew Levin who heads our ventures group, sort of built it sort of for these very early ideas, and it has been evolving. So my role is to work on the Raven incubator to help identify ideas, to work with other members of RA Capital, coming up with also ideas, again, internal or external, and then we pressure test them together. And the ones that sort of rise to the surface, even as early as they are, we diligence them, and then we put together these de-risking work plans to see, can we validate this technology, this asset, this chemical series, this platform technology basis? Can we make it a little bit more validated in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? And if the answer is yes at the end of that, where we put in our resources before we have to build a whole company and a whole management team and so on, if the answer is yes, then we have much greater conviction for the investment thesis, a greater valuation, and we build a whole company around it. So one example that sort of came out of stealth mode just a couple of weeks ago that I was not involved in with, but as an example of the Raven incubator is Avalar Therapeutics. So Avalar is focusing on extracellular degradation. It just came out of stealth a couple of weeks ago with a very, very healthy Series A. So that was a project that was incubated in Raven when it was still a very, a very embryonic idea. So my role at RA is to work with other members of the RA Capital team to help basically more of those success stories go through and create a really rich pipeline in the incubator, very early, very high risk, but then hopefully a significant fraction of them will be another Avalar Therapeutics. And hopefully, and there's more coming through the hopper. You'll see more come on out of stealth mode, soon. So that's one hat. That's a major hat of what I do. A second hat, what I do is I help the RA Capital team evaluate pre-existing startups that have already been formed externally that are very early stage and therapeutics focused. So I help also sort of in the investment and diligence discussions around these investment opportunities. And the third hat I wear simultaneously is I'm involved in the operations of one RA Capital portfolio company as a VP for corporate development at NewYorkBIO, which is building a pipeline of small molecule antivirals.
Okay.
So operations, strategy, and so on for Clear Creek.
We have a
okay. So go ahead, Jennifer.
But we do have a question, and it says any Nadim newcos that you can announce, and any but I think that was somewhat tongue in cheek, right? But then I think the real question is any particular areas of interest that you're really working on.
Well, we're definitely working on specific areas, but I can't disclose them for obvious reasons. I think the more important answer to that question is there are no specific areas of interest that we're only focused on.
Yeah.
We're therapeutic area agnostic. We're modality agnostic. But again, we're very therapeutically minded. We really like, again, this is not saying exclusively, but maybe we will definitely pay a little bit more attention, but we like everything that could potentially lead to transformative therapies for clinical unmet needs. But we like platform technologies that can develop new therapeutics that offer a better way of drugging clinically validated pathways. That is definitely something that'll, give us greater pause to look at longer than, we're definitely interested in that. But honestly, we're not therapeutic area focused. We love looking at all therapeutic areas. Of course, for certain areas, the bar will be higher because of all sorts of issues with respect to risk, feasibility, the competitive landscape, the future clinical trials, the typical, looking at the science, the feasibility, the unmet need, and the value proposition. Yeah.
So if we think back, we started this conversation in the nuclear winter of 2008, right? And now we're at a place where the $60-100 million Series A is the norm, right? So I almost said this when you said a healthy Series A before you used the term healthy, and I was going to ask what dollar figure is healthy these days, but this is slightly different. This is almost more interesting. So how do you go? What does the time scale look like from an idea or where you are now to $60 million, right? Has the amount of work that goes into a company that gets that kind of Series A, is that fundamentally different from what it used to be, or are there a number of things that are just kind of assumed to eventually happen under that? So what's the time scale for an Avalar, so to speak, to go from an idea within your fund to a syndicated $60 million A round?
Yeah, so that could be the whole basis for a whole call just in of itself.
We have time.
So yeah, so sort of in a nutshell, I think my thoughts are, and again, it's not like I've had years of working with venture, but only 1 year working in venture. But I think if there's an idea that if the first box is ticked, that if we can solve for it, it could be transformative, potentially transformative, not incremental, but really transformative. then the next box that needs to be ticked is how can we go from an idea that is potentially great to showing it's a tractable idea that has a feasible path to the next inflection point, and even a reasonable timeline with the activities and with all the activities involved to the first clinical proof of concept. Okay, because really, again, my forte is the early stage, but the real proof of concept is truly going to be in the clinic, because of all the limitations with preclinical models and so on and so forth. Obviously, that's a very, very general term. There's always a lot of variation, even in the predictability of the models, from disease area to disease area, and whether we're talking about certain platforms and so on. So, but those are the two biggest boxes we try to tick at our incubator. Is the idea really transformative and for a real unmet need? And this is where the RA Capital's Tech Atlas team is phenomenal. If you're not familiar with Tech Atlas, go to their website, check it out. It's our sort of competitive intelligence research group. And these group of individuals go so deep, so broad on specific therapeutic areas that they become sort of an encyclopedia of knowledge for your favorite disease area, every drug in development approved, what people think about it, mechanism of action, and also these beautiful maps that are also on our website. So that's a great resource that helps the incubator folk think about, could this idea be transformative and solve for a great unmet need? And then if the answer is yes, that's half the battle. Then we have to look at, is there a feasible plan, or are we going to be working on this, trying to validate it over the course of 5-6 years? So, obviously every project is different depending on how hot the first box is. But generally speaking, between 6 to 24 months, that's sort of, if we can't show a significant inflection point based on the feasibility data we generate in that period while it's incubating, then it becomes hard to imagine how this could be something we can get excited about.
Yeah. And we had actually sort of a tangential question from the audience. And this is more of approaching you, right? So it says, how do you market exciting tech like the next mRNA vaccine that are not so hot right now to VCs and pharma?
I think no different than any tech you would marketing, whether there's messenger RNA or something that's completely, I think making the argument, showing a rationale that your technology, why your technology stands out and how could it stand out. So making a rationale, what is the unmet need for your particular technology over what else is out there or what else isn't out there. And the second thing is, how can it be developed to solve that unmet need? It's basically the same two boxes that I described that we think about incubating ideas within the incubator. It's very similar, analogous to how we evaluate startup companies approaching us with their tech. So even if there's a crowded space, it doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity. It just means that you have to show, the startup has to show or make a case for why their technology has the potential to really stand out amongst a crowded area or a sparse area. And we're open to both. We definitely love both. I mean, we've had companies that are basically the third platform technology around a certain area where others have come before us, but we have conviction that our way of doing it is going to succeed where we believe the others have limitations, really maximizing the potential for their platforms, even if they came before us for the same type of platform.
Yep. So this is interesting. I think the pendulum has swung so far onto the side of fund-led company creation. Do you ever see the pendulum kind of going back to kind of independent entrepreneurs and things that almost get started independently at academic institutions? Or do you see this kind of hand-in-hand collaboration being the norm for as far as we can see?
it's exciting that the lines are beginning to blur as venture are moving more earlier, not just have a greater appetite for investing in early stage startups, but also rolling up the sleeves and doing early stage company creation, incubation. You're also seeing academic institutions. Again, OTA was, new and different years ago, now much less so.
Right.
And that's exciting. So many different institutions are beginning to develop their own de-risking initiatives, and they come in different shapes and flavors. And some institutions have certain strengths in certain areas than others, and it's a fun mix. So between what the investors are doing and between what the academics are doing, there's a lot greater for potential for overlap and productive collisions with each other. So yeah, I mean, I know for at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see venture capital firms, especially ones who have experience and are totally comfortable with the early stage. I don't see them unless some unforeseen economic calamity happens. I don't foresee them anytime in the near future sort of receding from the early stage. And with respect to academics, I think they've seen the fruits of doing these, investing resources, time, and effort in these early stage initiatives to push more stuff out. So no, I see a much more fertile soil for these types of productive collaborations, and more early stage startups that are well resourced being sort of birthed over and over again.
So I'm going to post the piece that you just wrote on the rapport site in the chat. It's really, really good. It goes over a number of things that we've talked about today, but it's a great read in case anybody from the audience wants to see it. So we're getting kind of close to the end of the hour, and one of the things that I genuinely wanted to ask you is, you look back at, say, IAVI, NYU, and now RA Capital. I would ask you how your perspective has changed from basically jumping from academia into IAVI, and then to NYU and to now. What are kind of maybe some of the big things in your perspective that have changed, and some of your big takeaways from each place?
I think my perspective has been refined over the years. I would say that's a better way. I can easily describe how my perspective has definitely been refined and reinforced. I think, given sort of the nature of sort of the early stage and company creation, and trying to build things from naught, or from a very, very sort of raw, primordial sort of starting point. I think the saying "it takes a village" becomes more and more and more pronounced. This really is a team sport, and I think for anybody working in this space, whether on the venture side, whether building a bootstrap startup company, trying to get their first SBIR grant, or people working in academia, whether people in tech transfer or these translation initiatives, or of course, principal investigators, you have to be cognizant that your probability of success is not guaranteed, but is greatly improved when you work with others and who bring complementary expertise, resources, and capabilities. Okay, one of the biggest lessons I've learned as I moved from the nonprofit sector to the for-profit sector, everybody wants to develop great technologies to make transformational therapies. A lot of people in both sides of the aisle want to, believe in translational science. But the biggest difference, culture difference, I saw on the for-profit side is there's a greater, not just appreciation, but almost celebration of collaboration, that you have to work with teams. So that's what I've learned, especially in building the early stage. I mean, it's obviously the case even for later stage, but definitely when you have a greater risk, greater questions unanswered around early stage science, you have to put together the right type of people who bring very complementary expertise in the right set of scientific disciplines, but also logistical and operational. Okay, funding is always going to be a challenge for everybody, no matter what. So that's an easy one. But the highest probability of success, I think, is working with teams. And this is a theme that's been reinforced over and over again. When I was at IAVI, again, it was academics, biotechs on the outside, working intimately close with the IAVI scientists, who are also a mix of more basic and clinically minded folks working together. When I moved to NYU, initially it was a pure transactional experiences with business and patenting, but that's also an essential element. But then you want to bring to bear on working very closely, collaboratively, as peers, as equal peers, with the people who are coming up with the science, the faculty, and so on. And so I think that's my biggest take home. I think that's been reinforces itself over and over and over again. It really takes a village to create value. The challenge for early stage innovators, entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call it, is really to find the minimal number of collaborators you can marshal with your limited resource to help you generate the most catalytic data package that can get you the next round of finances, whether from an investor, from a bigger grant, from an angel, from a pharma partnership, and so on. But you have to always be thinking, who are the right people or entities that can be very complementary, including, I should also add, investors can also bring the complementarity to it. A good investor in your company, in your startup, is not just going to bring in money. That's not what a good investor does only. A good investor is going to bring in money, capital, absolutely, but also that collective experience, both formally, on the board, as well as informally, really helping you champion and think about how to pressure test your technology and advance it to the next inflection point. So it takes a village. That's what's reinforced itself over the years with me and continues to do so.
Yeah. So we had at our stock exchange event last night, David Berry from Flagship talked about raising money in the age of COVID, and he basically he said it's great. He goes, I get these meetings with everybody all over the place. I do more in a day than I ever could before. And it was, it played really well to the audience, but, thinking about that and thinking about being remote, do you think the game has kind of changed, forever in that sense, in terms of how we think about collaboration and geography and how we think about either starting companies or doing what we do?
I think so. I think it has, even though I think definitely the remote situation that was sort of forced upon us because of the pandemic has actually, I think there's a net gain, because to what you described earlier, yes, people are much more productive. Geographical barriers are dissolving. So in that sense, it's good. There is something to say about the personal interactions. I've started going. The reason I missed the NewYorkBIO event yesterday, which looked like a fantastic event, because I was in Boston. I was, I every few weeks I go up to the office. And that's
all the time we have, folks.
Wait, we're losing you. We're losing.
Sorry.
I knew. I said
have a good day, everybody.
I said the B word. I'm sorry.
You were doing so well, Nadim.
I know.
I was going so well, Nadim. I'm sorry to have to.
All right, you can edit that last thing. So yeah, so to save the saving grace. So yes, I think yes, the remote way of collaborating is definitely here to stay. However, there's still value to the in-person interactions, to actually even building startups locally, not 100% virtually, but at the same time, you can't dismiss and discount the productivity imparted by the remote collaboration. And even before the pandemic, the virtualization of startups to really stretch your resources. And so and I think every ecosystem is facing that. So I think you can always make lemonade out of those lemons.
I think so. I think the interesting thing, and you've hit on the importance of teams so much here. If you have a really functional group of people, I think we've now added tools, and I would say social norms too, where that first meeting or the introduction or anything like that, you don't have to you don't have to fly to San Francisco or Seattle or Oklahoma
Yeah.
to sit down in person to go through your first 10 slides, right? I
Yep.
think there's going to be some very valuable places to be in person, but I think if we kind of, lower the barrier, at least for the initial stuff, and can make some of that a little bit more distributed and make you a little bit more efficient with your time, I think, like you said, I think it's a big net win.
Absolutely. And the final point I should say is, at least for RA Capital, we're looking for the best external ideas wherever they are. We don't have any geographical mandate or even preference. We want to start companies based on the best science out there, the best, technologies that could solve significant clinical unmet needs. And a lot of my inbox and my Zoom calendars are associated with New York-based science. So
Good answer.
and it's not because it's because this is a great well of fantastic science that has proven itself over and over and over again to lead to transformational therapies and fantastic startups. So we're not limited to only New York, but definitely every place with great science is in our crosshairs, and definitely New York is.
Yeah. Again, that's a great answer. You've been a fantastic guest today. Thank you so much. This is, I've really enjoyed kind of working with you for the decade or 15 years that we've known each other. And every time that you've gone to a new place, I've been both excited for you and excited for that place because they got somebody who I knew was really, really good. So this has been fantastic. Jennifer, I will kick it over to you to close out, because we've had a bunch of really good things happen for the end of the year, and I'll let you close for today.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Nadim. This was excellent. It was a very much a tour through the expansion and development, I think, of the New York life sciences, particularly as seen through your eyes with your work at NYU. We're really proud of the work that you've done, and you've actually seeded a lot more work that we're gonna, I know, be talking about in the future. So thank you for being our guest. Thank you to all of those of you listening who participated in our New York Stock Exchange event yesterday. It was a pretty great day for New York Life Sciences. So with that, we hope you enjoy your Tuesday, and we will see you next week for, I think, what is our final virtual breakfast series of the year. Thanks, Nadim.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Derek. This is wonderful. This was great. I love this.
Okay. Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on NewYorkBIO, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.